Someone graduates college in 2023, $120,000 in student loan debt, gets a job at a tech adjacent company with a ping pong table and unlimited PTO, which everyone is too scared to actually use. They make 54,000 a year. Rent is 2,300 a month. They're doing everything right. Budgeting, cooking at home, spreadsheets, color-coded spreadsheets. By the time they're 45, if absolutely nothing goes wrong, no medical bills, no layoffs, no relationship ending in an apartment split, no car dying, no emergency that touches savings, they might have $170,000, which adjusted for inflation will feel like maybe 100,000 in today's purchasing power, and they will look up one day and realize the game they were playing never actually had them as a potential winner. The rules weren't rigged against them personally. The rules were just written for someone else in a different time for a different economy. Here's the question that actually matters. Is this a discipline problem or is this a design problem? We're going to explain exactly how the traditional wealth building path works, why it's increasingly a losing system for anyone starting from zero in 2026, and what the actual mechanics look like behind the people who are quietly winning right now. Not the people flexing on social media, not the real estate course guys, the ones you've genuinely never heard of. And the reason you've never heard of them is because the way they think about money is boringly mechanical and not particularly Instagram friendly. I want you to imagine an escalator, not a working one, one that's going down. You step on, and if you stand still, you descend. If you walk at a moderate pace upward, you stay roughly in place. If you sprint hard, you make real progress, but you're exhausted, and the escalator does not care. It keeps moving downward at the same speed whether you're tired or not, whether it's a good week or a terrible one, whether you feel motivated or completely empty. That's the traditional wealth path for most Gen Z workers right now. The escalator is asset price inflation, cost of living increases, a tax structure that rewards ownership over labor, and a debt architecture designed to extract from your future before you've even built one. Your income is you walking. The escalator is everything working against you in the background, and the uncomfortable part, the part that should make you stop and actually think, is that some people figured out how to get off that escalator entirely, or how to find a different one, or how to build one that goes up. We're going to come back to that escalator a lot. Keep it in your head. Let's start with the most basic assumption people make about money. If I earn more, I'll be richer. Sounds obvious. Turns out it's only partially true, and the partial it misses is where most people quietly get destroyed. Here's what actually happens. The average Gen Z worker in the United States earns somewhere around $45,000 to $55,000 a year in their mid-20s. That sounds like a real number. It sounds workable. But after federal income tax, state income tax, FICA, which is Social Security and Medicare, you are taking home somewhere around 35 to 37,000 annually. That's 3,000 a month, give or take. Rent in a mid-tier American city, not New York, not San Francisco, somewhere genuinely average like Nashville or Denver or Austin, is now running between $1,600 and $2,200 a month. So before food, transportation, phone, internet, utilities, health insurance, or anything that constitutes actually being alive, you are left with somewhere between $800 and $1,400 per month to work with. Now, conventional personal finance, the kind that lives on Twitter and Reddit and has been recycled into 1,000 YouTube videos, tells you to save 20% of your income. That would be $600 a month on a 36,000 take home. $600 a month invested at a 7% average annual return, the standard index fund long run assumption, gives you, after 30 years, approximately $680,000. That's the dream scenario. No gaps, no emergencies. Compounding works without interruption. You retire at 55 with $680,000 and you call it a win. You did it, you played the game. Except here's what $680,000 means in 2026 terms. The median home in the United States right now costs around $410,000. In 1996, it was around $120,000. That same home has tripled in price within the lifetime of the person trying to buy it. Wages did not triple. Median wages went from roughly $30,000 a year in 1996 to around $55,000 today, a roughly 80% increase. The asset went up 240%. The income went up 80%. The gap between those two numbers is the escalator. That gap is the mechanic. That's the whole thing dressed up into statistics. And here's where the story gets darker. The people who already own assets in 2008 or 2012, when the financial crisis created prices and credit dried up and everyone panicked, did not just survive, they accumulated. because they had capital when capital was cheap and assets were temporarily undervalued. The crash was catastrophic for people with jobs and no savings and no assets. For people with assets and access to credit, it was a clearance sale. That's not a conspiracy. That's not a moral failing. That is simply how systems built around capital behave. Capital attracts capital. Labor attracts a paycheck. And a paycheck by structural design for most people is mostly spent before it can become capital. The escalator doesn't take days off. The payoff of all this, you don't have a savings problem. You have a position problem. You are selling labor in a market that increasingly rewards owning things, not doing things. Okay, so wages are lagging behind assets. Fine. Maybe the solution is just to earn more, get a higher paying job, negotiate better, do some freelancing on the side, hustle smarter. And look, that's not wrong as a direction. More income is better than less income, always. But there's a second mechanism working against you that most financial content doesn't address clearly enough, and it compounds the first one in a way that's genuinely brutal. It's the debt architecture of the traditional path. Let's be specific. The average student loan balance for a 4-year degree graduate in the United States right now sits around $37,000. For anyone who pursued graduate school, law, or medicine, that number is frequently six figures, and in medicine, it's not uncommon to see balances north of 250,000. The average interest rate on federal student loans issued over the last several years runs between 5 and 7%, which means someone with 40,000 in student debt on a standard 10-year repayment plan is paying approximately $420 a month. And in the early years, a significant chunk of that is pure interest. You're not paying down principal first. You're servicing the cost of the debt first. That's how amortization works. It's not predatory, it's just math that works in the lender's favor early on. So you graduate, you are not buying assets with your income, you are paying down debt with your income, which is the right thing to do. Debt is real and it must be addressed. But here is the structural reality. The traditional path told you to take on debt to purchase access to income. That was the promised trade. Debt now, income later. The problem is that the income on the other side of that trade hasn't kept pace with the cost of the debt. And the jobs that used to require a credential now require a credential plus experience plus a portfolio plus a network plus demonstrated skills that you supposedly built somehow while paying to go to school. In the 1980s and 1990s, a 4-year degree was a genuine multiplier. It reliably converted a working class background into a professional income that was materially life-changing. That is not a myth, it worked. For a generation, maybe two, it worked extremely well. The problem is that the system, universities, lenders, employers, priced the premium in. Tuition went up because degrees were valuable. More employers started requiring degrees for roles that historically didn't need them. The credentials spread to positions where it added no actual informational value, it just became a filter, so the price of the credential exploded while the marginal return of holding it compressed. You now have people with 4-year degrees in positions that pay the same as those positions paid someone without a degree 20 years ago, except now there's a $40,000 debt attached to the job application. That's not an individual failure by anyone. That's a classic credential inflation cycle that everyone participated in because individually it made sense to, even though collectively it destroyed the value of the thing everyone was buying. And the debt doesn't just cost you the monthly payment. It costs you the opportunity cost of every dollar going to interest instead of compounding. $420 a month for 10 years is $50,400 in total payments. Invested at 7% over the same 10 years, that money would have grown to approximately $73,000. That $73,000 gap between where you are and where you could have been with that same cash flow is just one debt source, not a car loan. Not medical debt, not credit card interest. Just the student loan doing its quiet work on your future the entire time you're walking up the escalator. Now you might be thinking, but what about high income careers? Doctors, lawyers, investment bankers, software engineers at big tech companies? Those people escape this, right? And yes, to a degree for a while. But even there, the math is uncomfortable. A physician finishes residency at roughly 30 to 32 years old. They spent a decade being paid minimally for extremely skilled and exhausting work. They exit training with anywhere between $250,000 and $400,000 in student debt. Then they enter their 30s with a high income and very commonly immediately inflate their lifestyle to match it, which is not weakness, it's what every psychological reward circuit in the human brain tells you to do after years of delayed gratification. Realistically, many physicians don't begin accumulating meaningful wealth until their early to mid 40s. That's a 40-year timeline from starting college to genuine financial flexibility. During those 40 years, the assets they're trying to eventually buy have continued to escalate. This is escalation cycle two's payoff. The traditional path doesn't just take a long time. It extracts money from you continuously the entire time you're traveling it. You're paying the escalator a fee to ride it, and the escalator is still going down. If you're finding this useful, and I think you are because you've made it this far, subscribe. I put out one video a week on how money systems actually work. Not theory, not inspiration, the mechanics. If that's what you're looking for, the button is right there. Here's the part where most financial content would hand you a solution. Start a side hustle, max your Roth IRA, cut subscriptions. I'm not going to do that yet, not because those things are wrong, but because before we get to what actually works, we need to understand the third mechanism, the one that makes the other two dramatically harder to escape. It's called the asset ownership gap, and it's the most structurally important concept in this entire video. As of 2025, the top 10% of Americans by wealth hold approximately 67% of all financial assets in the country. Stocks, bonds, real estate equity, business ownership interests. The bottom 50% hold roughly 2.5%. These numbers have been moving in one direction for the last 4 decades toward concentration. And I want to be careful here because this is where a lot of content goes wrong. This is not a political statement. I'm not making a moral argument. I'm describing a mathematical pattern that has direct implications for how you should think about your own position. When the stock market goes up 15% in a year, which it did recently, that 15% return distributes proportionally to ownership. If you own $1,000 in an index fund, you made $150. If you own $1 million in that same fund, you made $150,000. Same percentage, radically different dollar outcome. The system rewards scale, always and without exception, because scale is the nature of compounding, and scale requires prior capital to start. You can't compound zero. This is where the escalator metaphor shows its real structure. The escalator runs differently depending on what floor you started from. If your family owned a home that appreciated meaningfully over the last 30 years, the median American home appreciated from around 120,000 in the mid-90s to over 400,000 today, then your family quietly became asset wealthy without making any particular decision. They just owned a thing and time passed. If you came from that background, even if you didn't inherit cash directly, you benefited from a family with more financial flexibility, more ability to help you with a down payment, more of a safety net that let you take risks with your career or your investments. The escalator was slower for you, or it was partially going up. If your family owned nothing, no home equity, no investments, no business, then you start the game with no capital seed and the full force of the escalator working against you. There's a concept in behavioral economics where researchers found that even small inheritance amounts, as low as $25,000, create measurably different lifetime financial outcomes compared to receiving nothing, not because 25,000 changes your life directly. It doesn't, but because it provides the seed capital that allows compounding to begin, it puts you on the escalator one floor higher. The difference isn't emotional, it's mechanical. And now the reversal, because this is where the real insight is. You think the problem is that rich people have unfair personal advantages. That's only the surface reading. The deeper reality is that the advantages are structural, not personal. The tax code in the United States taxes long-term capital gains, profits from owning assets, at 15% for most middle and upper middle income earners. Meanwhile, ordinary income from wages is taxed at 22 to 24% for that same income bracket. So a person who earns $60,000 by working is taxed at 22%. A person who earns $60,000 by holding stock that went up is taxed at 15%. The rules written by legislators who are themselves asset wealthy favor asset income over labor income. This is not secret information, it's in the tax code, it's publicly available. Most people just never sit down and follow the logic of what it implies. The game is explicitly designed to reward you more for owning things than for doing things. So the third mechanism of the downward escalator is this. The rules of the system are written to favor the position you don't have yet. And every year you're not in that position, the gap between you and it quietly widens. Let me give you a concrete scenario, not a real person. A simplified model of a pattern I've observed play out repeatedly in different forms. Two people, same age, 22, starting in 2023. Call them A and B. Person A does everything traditionally correct. 4-year degree from a decent school. 42,000 in student debt at 6% interest, starts work at a company paying 54,000 a year, after taxes takes home around 38,000, rent is 1,800 a month in a mid-sized city. After covering rent, utilities, food, transportation, and a student loan payment, $420 monthly, they're saving about $350 per month. They invest every dollar of it into a broad index fund. They do this faithfully without missing a month for 15 years. Discipline is not their problem. Consistency is not their problem. Person B leaves college after 1 year, has roughly 10,000 in debt, which they pay off in about 18 months by working in inside sales, a job that rewards output, not credentials. No degree premium coming in, so they start at 38,000. Same city, same rent. But after they clear that initial debt in month 18, they have no ongoing loan payment. They take the $400 a month that person A is permanently sending to a lender and redirect it. They go in with one other person found on a real estate investing forum online, not through some magical network, and together they buy a $45,000 duplex in a smaller market, purchased remotely. Their personal down payment contribution is $8,000. Every dollar they had. The duplex cash flows modestly. Their share of income above the mortgage payment is about $110 a month. Not impressive, not life changing, not even particularly exciting. Fast forward 15 years, 2038. Person A has invested $350 a month without fail for 15 years. At 7% average annual return, they have approximately $111,000 in their index fund. That is real money, real progress, no complaints. Person B's duplex has appreciated. Real estate in that smaller market averaged 4% annual appreciation. Conservative, realistic. The $45,000 property is now worth $81,000. Their equity share after accounting for the mortgage paydown from tenant rent is around $32,000. They've been reinvesting that monthly cash flow, which grew as rents increased, and they own a partial interest in a second property now. Total real estate net worth, including equity positions, around 60,000. Their invested savings are lower than A's in total because some years were tighter, around 79,000. Combined net worth, approximately $139,000. That's not a massive difference at 15 years. Person A has 111,000, person B has 139,000. Not dramatic, but here's what matters more than the number. Person A's wealth is entirely in paper assets. It requires the market to keep performing. It requires them to keep contributing from labor income. It requires them to keep walking up the escalator. Person B has an income producing asset. It generates returns whether or not person B is working that day. And income producing assets fund more income producing assets. The compounding between years 15 and 30 for person B is not linear. The rental income accelerates the acquisition of additional assets, which accelerate the income, which accelerates the asset acquisition. Person A compounds their savings, person B compounds their position. Same 15 years, very different escalator for the next 15. The gap between A and B at 45 is not about who worked harder. Person A very likely worked harder. It's not about who was smarter or more disciplined. It's about which escalator they stepped onto at 22. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Person B got lucky. They found a partner on an internet forum and bought a property at 22, and everything worked out. You know where they found that partner? A subreddit about house hacking. You know what that cost? Nothing. The information is free. The forum is free. The barrier was knowing where to look and being willing to act on imperfect information instead of waiting for perfect clarity that never actually arrives. Your excuses are also free. Everything checks out. Here's the fourth mechanism. And this one is the strangest and in some ways the most insidious because it looks like advice when it's actually a trap. I call it the time compression problem. The traditional wealth building path was designed for a specific kind of time, 40 years of stable employment, a pension that waited for you at the end, a retirement at 65, benefits you could count on because the company you worked for was likely to exist in 30 years and had both the means and the legal obligation to pay you what they promised. That was a realistic design for the mid 20th century American worker. That era is not declining, it is over. It ended somewhere between the 1980s and the early 2000s, and it is not returning. The average Gen Z worker is projected to hold somewhere between 12 and 15 different jobs over their working life, not 12 to 15 roles at the same organization. 12 to 15 distinct jobs, some at companies that don't exist yet because the industries that will create them are still being invented. This is not weakness or instability in the personal sense, it's structural volatility. The economy accelerates and the career path designed to navigate it becomes increasingly misaligned with the actual shape of a working life. And this matters enormously for the traditional plan because the traditional plan requires time consistency. Contribute to your 401k for 30 years without interruption. Let it compound. Withdraw at 65. That plan works mathematically, but it requires continuous employment, continuous contribution, and no major gaps. Job transitions reset vesting schedules. Moving between states changes tax obligations and sometimes healthcare coverage. The gig economy, which an increasing percentage of Gen Z earns income through by choice or necessity, does not come with automatic retirement contributions, employer matches, or any of the infrastructure that makes the traditional plan function as designed. Every gap in employment is a gap in compounding. Every transition costs friction. The plan assumes a stability that the job market no longer provides. But here's the second layer of the time compression problem, and this is the one that really ties the whole analysis together. The traditional plan tells you to be patient, save consistently, trust the compounding, wait. And that advice is built for someone who has time, someone who can wait 30 years and have the asset they're targeting still be acquirable at the end of 30 years of saving. But if the asset you need, housing primarily, is appreciating faster than your savings are compounding, you're not gaining on it. You're watching it move away from you. And if you don't yet have the lump sum for a down payment, you are not in the compounding game at all. You are observing the game from outside the arena. Every year you observe the entry price increases. The escalator doesn't wait for you to save enough to board it. It just keeps going. And there's a psychological component to this that's worth naming precisely. When financial advice tells a 22-year-old to save and compound and be patient, it is giving advice calibrated for someone with affordable housing, manageable or no debt, access to a pension or employer match, and a stable job market that rewards loyalty and consistency. If none of those conditions apply, and for the majority of Gen Z workers, most of them don't, the advice is not wrong in a vacuum, it's miscalibrated, it's the right answer to the wrong version of your question. It's telling you to optimize your performance on the downward escalator instead of asking whether you should be on a different escalator entirely. By the way, and I want to be clear about this video is not a boomers ruined everything video. That's a boring and inaccurate framing. Boomers played the game they were given access to. Their game happened to include median home prices that tripled in their lifetimes without requiring any particular financial sophistication. They bought houses because everyone bought houses. The houses became their primary wealth vehicle by accident of timing. That's not their fault. If someone handed me a lottery ticket and the numbers came up, I wouldn't feel guilty about winning. I would just probably decline to write a best-selling book explaining that lottery winners succeed because of their superior discipline and foresight. That would be irritating. Let me come back to where we started. Someone graduates college, $120,000 in student debt, gets a job, budgets carefully, saves consistently, does precisely what they were told to do, and quietly loses ground to the escalator. Is this a discipline problem or a design problem? It is a design problem, and design problems have design solutions. Here's what actually changes the trajectory: not hustle culture, not a higher savings rate, not willpower, structure. The question is not how do I earn more? The question is how do I position myself so that money works alongside my labor instead of only being generated by it? 3 things, not 10, not a 20-step framework. 3. First, stop optimizing the wrong variable. Most people optimize their income before they have thought seriously about their asset position. Income matters. Don't misread this, but income is linear by nature. An extra $10,000 a year in salary is an extra $10,000 per year, and only for as long as you keep showing up. An asset that produces income compounds over time without requiring more of your time as it scales. The moment you can convert even a small portion of your income into an income producing asset, a rental unit with a partner, a fractional equity stake in a business, a meaningful position in a dividend generating fund, you've changed the direction of your escalator, even partially, even imperfectly, even slowly. The direction is what matters first. Speed comes after direction. If you're sprinting on a downward escalator, you have a direction problem, not a speed problem. Second, understand that the type of debt matters as much as the amount. This is not avoid all debt. That's an oversimplification that sounds prudent, but actually just keeps you playing defense forever. The real distinction is between debt that extracts from your future and debt that produces alongside your future. A student loan extracts. It funds access to income but does not produce income itself, and the income premium it delivers has been compressing relative to its cost for 15 years. A mortgage on a property that generates rental income produces the debt is real, the monthly payment is real. But if a tenant is making most of that payment while the asset appreciates in the background, That debt is doing different work than a student loan or a car payment or a credit card balance. These are not morally different categories, they are mechanically different. Every financial commitment you make from this point forward deserves one question: does this extract from my future, or does it produce alongside it? Third, deliberately compress your timeline. The traditional path assumes 40 years and builds every piece of advice around that assumption. That assumption is embedded in your 401k structure, in compound interest charts, in retirement calculators, in every piece of conventional financial advice you have ever received. The advice calibrated to 40 years is not wrong for 40 years, but you are operating in an environment where the economic rules shift meaningfully every 5 to 8 years. Technologies appear and make entire industries restructure. Asset classes emerge, compress, mature. Job categories appear and disappear inside of a decade. Planning for 40 years in that environment is not prudence. It's a different kind of risk. The risk of optimizing for a future that arrives looking completely different than the map you drew. Plan for 7 years instead. What can you build, own, or position yourself in over the next 7 years that changes your asset situation in a structural way? It does not have to be massive, it has to be directional. One small real estate position, one equity stake in a small business, one income stream that is not purely tied to your hours and your labor. Any one of these, pointed in the right direction and held with patience, does more for your financial future over the long run than 30 years of flawlessly optimized budgeting on a descending escalator. Here's the thing that conventional financial advice completely misses, and is also the most counterintuitive part of this whole video. The people who are quietly building wealth right now are not more disciplined than the people who aren't. They are not smarter. They are not working harder. They are not more passionate about their work or more deserving of their outcomes. They identified earlier, through luck, through observation, through the right conversations or the right content at the right moment, that the escalator was going down. And instead of walking faster and faster and wondering why they weren't making progress, they stopped, looked around, and found a different one. Or they built one, even slowly, even imperfectly, even starting with almost nothing. The direction of the escalator you're on is the most important financial variable in your life right now. More important than your savings rate, more important than your income, more important than your investment vehicle, because all of those things are walking speed. And walking speed only matters once you're on an escalator that's going up. That's the whole video. If this gave you a useful framework for thinking about your own position, subscribe.